From the EPR Creation Studio, this is Jason Staples, bringing you Unconquered with Doc Staples. As always, this podcast brought to you by EPR Creations, bringing you the best of internet marketing and website development for an affordable price. By Louis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida. By Shenandoah Newsma of shenrealestate.com in the Research Triangle of North Carolina. And by Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida. Thanks, as always, to my sponsors, and also to those of you who have been supporting me over at Patreon and Substack and everything else. Very much appreciated. Yes, as always. Now, let's go ahead and get to a couple things. Actually, I got a question I meant to answer in the hot takes here. This is from Merrill Coleman over at Patreon. He asked, these were questions that he sent out actually at halftime of the game. On Wake's first drive after our score, why on earth are the corners so far back? They were sitting at like 11 yards. To be totally honest, I don't understand why Florida State plays so deep and why they play so deep against teams that don't really throw the ball well deep. It drives me crazy. There are times, if you go through my film breakdown, which I got up very late in the week, this is just a little bit of inside baseball from my end. My time is very much tightening up outside the podcast, outside of my sports coverage career, such that it's everything I can do to get anything out right now. I've just taken over 2 more classes for a faculty member that will not be able to finish the semester due to some extenuating circumstances. So that adds a bunch more prep. I've got a conference coming up and a chapter due and a whole host of other things that, and I'm on a book review panel for a 1,000-page book this next week. So just getting anything out right now is a beast. But and as always, thank you for those of you who are supporting, because it does help make it worth it in that respect. But yeah, so I got that out late, as I mentioned, and one of the reasons that, or one of the things that I focused on in that was there are a few plays where it's like, why is there's one 1st and 10 where Wilson, Jerry Wilson, he starts at 11 yards and then he immediately goes into a bail and he's at 20 yards almost when the ball is caught around almost the line of scrimmage. So he's got like 17 yards between him and the receiver to come up and do that. And there's nobody going deep. I don't understand at all. I mean, if you're going to start at 11 yards, there's no reason to bail so quickly, even if you do have deep zone. There's just no reason. I don't understand why they do this. There are other cases where you have the rover, the middle safety, who's playing 20, 25 yards off. He's backpedaling all the way to 25 yards, and there's not a soul within 10, 15 yards of him in terms of depth. And then they're hitting something right in front of him. And it's like, dude, if you're just at 15, 20 yards here instead of 25, 30 yards, you're fine. You don't give that play up, but they just keep dropping so deep. I don't understand what they're doing in the secondary, and it drives me crazy, to be honest, because what they're doing on the back end right now, just across the board, I don't understand it at all in terms of how they're really not matching in any meaningful way. They did do a better job against mesh this week in terms of handling the crossers, but then the person who's going to be responsible for the OTB, the over the ball route that normally comes with that. Normally there's a dig or an over the ball route that's going to get open up behind those 2 shallow crossers. You need to have somebody cover that, and over and over and over again, that guy's just wide open. I mean, you got sometimes a middle linebacker who's responsible for that zone, and he's just got his eyes on the quarterback, and he just lets a person set up behind him like 4 yards inside or outside him, because he's just not looking to match where that route's going to be. He sees the 2 crossers. There's going to be somebody back there. Find it with your eyes, then get your eyes back on the quarterback. I don't understand why they're not doing that. They're not, to me, that means they're not being coached to do it. There are other times where it was the middle safety who is expected to come up and cover that, and he's 10 yards too deep. I don't understand. So that part's driving me crazy. And the thing is, if you have any sort of competent quarterbacking and this is going to be a theme in this particular preview, the Clemson preview, if you have competent quarterbacking that, a guy's going to be able to get the ball out and throw with accuracy, those plays are just routine. It's easy. They're there to be made, and offenses can march the ball down the field because you're playing with such enormous cushions and you're not matching routes the way that you ought to. Even in spot drop stuff, you need to be prepared to match to where they're going to be so that you're not just covering grass all the time. I mean, you don't have to play it like true match where you're man-to-man essentially once he comes into your zone, but you do need to kind of figure out where he's going and where he's going to be and work your way to that. I don't really get it, but yeah. So that's my answer. My answer is I don't have a good answer because I don't think there is one. And, that is bonkers to me. Second question was, is there a reason that Gus is not throwing the fade ball more in the red zone to Deuce Robinson? As a lifetime Knoll, I remember Greg Carr, and we knew he was getting at least one fade once you got inside the 10-yard line. Yes, the old Jeff Bowden rainbow offense, which eventually became throw it up to Greg Carr. He's got a pretty good chance of making that a 70-30 or 80-20 ball. Why not? Well, there are a lot of coaches who are sort of predisposed against the fade or the one-on-one. And it's not as high of a percentage as a lot of these coaches would like. But I do think with a guy like Robinson, you're probably better off just, I made this argument with one of my head coaches at one point when we were having a little bit of trouble in the red zone. And I was coaching receivers at the time, and I looked at him. I'm like, we're in high school, and I've got a 6'5", a 6'4", and a 6'3" wide receiver out here. We could just pick which defensive back we want to go at and just throw it up 3 times. And even if it's a 30, if it's a 1/3 ball, a 33% ball, we're going to get one of them out of those 3. And odds are one of the other ones might be a pass interference. So, what's going to go wrong? I just got to make sure my guy doesn't allow the defender to intercept it, and we're fine. So I'm kind of with you. I'm in the minority these days. A lot of the analytics guys and all that, they hate the fade. But I think if you learn to run it well, and if you've got a dude out there, especially in college, I think in the pros the fade is often a waste. But in college, especially, if you've got that matchup against a college corner with that kind of dude, you ought to take advantage of it more. So I don't quite understand either. But, I'm very much from the coaching school of hit the easy button as many times as you can. If you've got an easy button, just keep pressing it until it stops being so easy. But that's just me. I don't know. I don't really understand why all this isn't done at times, but it's easy to get sidetracked in other respects. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and then get to the Clemson preview. And, this is going to be a tough one. This is a tough game to preview for a lot of reasons, but maybe the foremost reason is that these are the two of the 4 based on Bill Connolly's numbers. And then if you look at several other advanced metrics and so on, 2 of the 6 or so least lucky teams in the country. Clemson is the unluckiest team in the country so far in terms of in-game win expectancy versus record. And Florida State right now is one of the 4 worst. They're, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th, somewhere in there. So, what are you going to get? It's really hard to assess that. And each of these teams has been pretty hot and cold too. I mean, you look at what Clemson's done this year, and they've gone out and they've blasted a couple teams, not many, but they went out and they blasted a bad North Carolina team. They blasted Boston College, which is a terrible team, at Boston College. And then they basically lost to every other team with a pulse that they've played. They lost 17-10 to LSU. They lost 24-21 to Georgia Tech. Those are 2 one-possession losses. They lost 35-24, they lost 34-21 to Syracuse, and that's a different Syracuse team now that Angeli got hurt in that game. They lost to SMU, 35-24, and then lost to Duke in that last second bit with a pretty bad break for them too down the stretch, 45-46 in that game. So they've not had success. They've not broken through against a team with a pulse this season. And at the same time, they've been in position to potentially win all of those games. I mean, Syracuse and weirdly, the Syracuse game and the SMU game are the two games where they were least in the ball game. But in basically all the other games, they were right there. They should have beaten Duke. They probably should have beaten Georgia Tech. They were right down to the wire against LSU, and they lost that one partly because Klubnik just didn't take advantage of a couple of wide open plays against the blitz that he had, where they walk in if he makes the correct throw. But they were in position to win any of those three games, and they lost all of them. They had something like an 80-some win likelihood in the Duke game based on how those stats actually went about, and Duke still managed to win. I mean, that's just the way it's been. Florida State, on the other hand, I mean, I don't have to go into it for you all. You've all been watching. And Florida State right now should probably be a 2-loss team instead of a 4-loss team. And you can make a case that they probably should, and based on how they've played through the majority of those games and the statistical profile in those games, they should probably be a 1-loss team right now. But they found ways to be bad situationally and give up a couple key plays and not make a couple others and not recover fumbles all season and, drop pick sixes and things like that. But basically they've been in that position all season where they've just been a play or two short all season, and they should be a 1 or 2 loss team. That's just the way that this has been. These two teams have been a lot better than their record on a down-to-down, drive-to-drive basis, but they've found every way to put bullets into their own feet all season. So how do you preview that? What do you expect? Which team is going to be the one to break tendency and go out and not lose? There's the old saying that more games are lost than are won. And these two teams have found ways over the course of this season to lose a bunch of games rather than going out and winning it. And the teams that have beaten them haven't really gone out and won it as much as Clemson and Florida State in a couple cases have gone out and lost. Now, give Virginia credit. They went out and they won it. Miami of Florida went out there and they won it. Duke went out there and they nutted up and won it when it came down to it at the end. But Clemson found ways to get in their own way and cause problems for themselves in each of these cases. Florida State found ways to cause problems and lose these games when statistically they were better through games that they lost, through at least 3 of the 4. And Clemson has been better in at least 3 of the 5 losses that they have. Can you believe, by the way, that these two teams have 9 combined losses going into this game? It's nuts. And this was a Clemson team. I'll be very honest. I had this Clemson team in the national championship game this year. I thought they were the national title favorite based on who they were returning defensively. They got a bunch of NFL talent that they'd kept homegrown, that they'd kept on the roster. They had a 4th-year quarterback. They have some pretty good wide receivers in terms of the talent there. To me, I thought this team would really blossom this year with a bunch of that returning talent, and they had some returnees on the offensive line as well. But it turns out they've just not been that good on either side of the ball. They've not been physical. They've not gone out and made plays. They've had key bad turnovers. They've found ways not to score in the red zone. They've found ways to give up scores that they ought not to. They're -5 in turnover margin on the season. They've only forced 8 total turnovers. They've lost 13. And in terms of red zone, they're not all that great. In red zone, they've been 65% in terms of touchdown percentage. That's, against Power 5, that's 69. I mean, it's not great. You got to be better than that. That's what Clemson's been. And again, we've all seen this from Florida State as well. So it's a hard game to preview because of those things. Now, when Florida State's on offense, is going to be a really interesting matchup because Clemson has been pretty good defensively in stretches. Their run defense has been okay to good. And one of the things you want to look at is like, okay, what are the commonalities in their losses? What is it that teams have done to beat them? And then when you start to try to whittle down at it, you go, there aren't as many commonalities as you'd expect. So you think about this. Against Syracuse ran the football 38 times for 154 yards, 4.05 yards per carry, and you're like, okay, that must be the commonality. They're giving up rushing yardage. And then you look at SMU, which, by the way, is the closest offensively to what they're gonna have faced to Florida State. SMU runs basically the same offense as Malzahn, has a similar quarterback in Jennings. So a lot of similarities there, even to Jennings being banged up and having an ankle injury. They're similar offenses, and SMU scored 35 points. So that's a plus as you're coming into this. But you look at it and you go, okay, 28 carries, 139 yards, 4.96 yards per carry. All right, so the commonality to beat this team, you got to run the ball pretty well. You're going to be able to run the ball for more than 4 yards a carry. That'll do. And then you go, well, wait, no, actually, Duke, 22 carries, 78 yards, 3.55 yards per carry. They still lost that one. Georgia Tech, good rush offense, 42 carries, 147 yards, 3.5 yards per carry. LSU, 3.48 yards per carry, 31 carries, 108 yards, and that's it. And they lost those games too. So not entirely something that is just a common matter of like run the football well and you're going to beat this Clemson team. There are other factors. Defensively, SMU didn't throw it that well. 53.5 completion percentage, 2 touchdowns, 1 pick, 290 total yards on 43 attempts. They probably threw it more than they should have, but they managed to come out a winner. Duke, on the other hand, 27 of 42 for 361, 4 touchdowns, no picks. Well, no wonder they scored 46 points. Syracuse, 21 of 39, 279, 3 touchdowns, no picks. But Georgia Tech, 20 of 28 for 211 and nothing. No picks, no interceptions, or no touchdowns, no picks. There's not a bunch of commonality in terms of how they've lost. They've just found different ways to lose in a bunch of these games. Defensively, they've given up a ton of points. And part of the problem has been they've not been good enough in any one domain to take away whatever teams they're facing do best. They've not been able to bottle teams up and force them to win left-handed, which is very different from how Clemson's been in the past. I mean, when Venables was there, you knew you had to be able to find some way to run the football or you would be behind the chains and he's bringing it and you better have some dudes at wide receiver or you're in trouble because he's going to stack the box. He's going to force you to beat him throwing the football. You have to be able to run well enough to keep him honest, but you got to beat him throwing it. Most of the time, unless you have Dalvin Cook. Well, this is just different. So to me, the SMU game against Clemson is really the key to this. I don't think Florida State wants to have to throw 43 times, which SMU did in that game. And I think Castellanos' stat line would probably look pretty similar. Two touchdowns, 1 pick, 53% completion percentage, something like that would be, I think, pretty realistic if they did have to throw 43 times. But at the end of the day, I think what you're trying to do is just get rolling and get the run game going and do what SMU did there, which was over 4 yards a carry. Once again, the run game on that one, SMU was almost 5 yards a carry, 4.96 yards per carry. I think that's what you're aiming for there. You got to come out and you've got to use your whole run game. You've got to make them honor the quarterback as much as possible. And you got to find some ways to get some chunk plays in the run game to essentially stay ahead field position wise and put them off balance, and then you can play action off of that. I don't think they have, and they've had a bunch of great corners, and they've got some good corners in this game, but I don't think they have a corner that they're going to be able to just lock up a Deuce Robinson with this year. I've not seen that from Clemson when I've watched them so far. They've got good DBs, but they don't have your elite DBs. They got a couple guys that might grow into that, but they're not quite there yet. And I think you do have some advantages on the outside, but you're going to have to take advantage of them in the right down and distance and go at the one-on-ones when you get them. So what do you expect? I do think Florida State will have some answers for Clemson defensively. I think somewhere in the same range of what SMU did in terms of offensive output is realistic. I think same scheme, same situation, both on the road at Clemson. Very similar quarterbacks. I think FSU has a little bit better skill talent than what SMU does. I think they're pretty comparable up front. I think you can kind of expect somewhere in that range of, 35 points. Realistically in this game that's within reach. And if you look at what they've given up, aside from the North Carolina game and the Boston College game where neither of those teams can score, they've given up mid-20s to the 30s against basically everybody since mid-September. 24 to Georgia Tech, 34 to Syracuse, 35 to SMU, 45 to Duke. So somewhere in the mid-30s, I think is very realistic. And if you want to look at what the problem for Clemson has been, it's that they have not been good enough defensively. And you all saw the footage of Dabo reaming out his defense on the sideline last week against Duke because they couldn't get a stop. And, if you're Florida State, you look at that and you go, hopefully he's doing that again. But I've seen really no indication that defensively they've figured something out to where they're gonna stop, all the remaining teams on their schedule and play up to the level that we expected defensively. I don't think that they have that level of physicality, the kind of thing that I kind of expected them to have coming into the year. They don't have that the Venables kind of physicality to really come after you the way that they've done in the past. So, SMU is 6 yards per play, 35 points. And for me, I think that's very realistic in this game. Somewhere between 35 and 38 points. Somewhere around there is where I would guess. 6 yards per play. I think that's realistic. So then we turn over to the other side of the ball. And now we're going to talk Florida State on defense, Clemson on offense. So this is where the problem lies for me. Because I think the same is basically true for Florida State against Clemson's offense. I think Clemson happens to match up well against what FSU does. For the most part. Right? If we're talking about Clemson's offense against Florida State's defense, Florida State's defense has been good generally against teams that really want to line up and stop the run, but don't have a quarterback that is comfortably putting the ball into the intermediate zones and just throwing it into space. Whenever they've played a guy that's comfortable doing that, they've given up points. They gave up 46 to Virginia and Chandler Morris. They gave up 34 to Pittsburgh and Heinzel. They gave up, 20 to Stanford. Stanford doesn't have one of those guys. That was a weird game. It's one of the statistically weirdest games we've seen in a long time. And Florida State ultimately, they ran up and down the field for 450 plus yards and scored 13 points to lose the game. That wasn't on the defense so much. But still, the defense was not, did not play with the level of intensity that they needed to. But basically, when Florida State's played competent quarterbacking, they gave up 46 to Virginia, 28 to Miami, and 34, Miami, Florida, and 34 to Pitt. And Alabama, who does have a very competent quarterback now, he struggled mightily in that game, not because of coverage. They did get him on the move and put him under pressure a bunch in his first road game, but he missed guys, just flat out missed them. And they had some drops as well. But against teams that have executed it all in the passing game, there's been space there. Wake Forest this week, and I got some questions about this in the in the interim. Wake Forest this week, they put the clamps on Wake Forest, should have gotten a shutout. But when I went and I watched the defensive film, hoo boy, there was a lot of space there for that the secondary gave up. And against a competent quarterback, they could have given up 35, 40 points in that game easily. Because, I mean, you had numerous times the quarterback had a guy wide open and just skipped it. Just put the ball in the dirt right in front of him. Or just way wide or over the head. You just missed him. And if you don't miss those guys who are wide open, then you're getting these first downs. You're moving up the field. A couple of these, there's one in particular. They came out of a reduced split set, and they did a little toss, looking like it was going to the weak side, little toss boot, and brought the receiver on a little cross country route, just a deep cross. And that play should have scored from probably 70, 80 yards out. I mean, there was nobody there. The entire defense went after the fake. Wide open. The only guy that should have had a chance to make a tackle was the backside corner, who was in, deep coverage against the other receiver who's running him off. And the quarterback just missed him. Put it in a bad spot, and the receiver ended up dropping it. But that's not the defense. That's just Wake being bad. And I went back and I looked at that, and I'm going, look, if I'm Clemson, I'm running this concept more than once. I'm trying to set up for that little toss more than once. I'm going to run it. And then eventually I'm going to do that same little toss to the boot. And I'm going to have Cade Klubnik throwing to Wesco, the wide receiver, somebody like that. And he's going to be wide open. And I'm going to score from 70 yards out because that guy can fly. I'm going to get it to one of the guys that can really run. And if Florida State responds anything like they did, then they're going to give up a big play. Those plays are there to be had. And I expect Clemson is going to make some of them because Klubnik can actually throw the football. And they've got wide receivers who can really run and receivers who can catch the ball. So that's a bad matchup for Florida State. It's one of the better quarterbacks you played. A lot of people preseason would have had him as the best or the second best quarterback on this schedule. And you're dealing with a defense that's not been very good against competent quarterbacking. They just haven't played a bunch of it. And when they have, they've lost. Those 4 losses all came against quarterbacks that did ultimately make those throws when it mattered. Now, here's the key. Here's where I think this game ultimately gets decided. Cade Klubnik has been a completely different quarterback all season and really through his entire career when he's playing where he doesn't have leverage, where he's got any sort of pressure. When he's got to play under pressure, and that's not just pressure in the pocket. That's game pressure. That's what's the game situation? Is this a gotta win type situation? Is this a high pressure situation in terms of crunch time? He has struggled in those types of situations his whole career. And when you're able to double down on that with pressure in the pocket, this is a guy who does not like getting hit. He does not like pressure. If you can get pressure in his face, his eyes come down, he misses spots, he misses open receivers. You have to come after him. I mean, I'm looking at his numbers right now. Pro Football Focus on the season, when he's kept clean, his Pro Football Focus grade is 88, which is bordering on elite. That's really, really good. When he's under pressure, his Pro Football Focus grade falls to 60.9, which is very average. All of a sudden, his completion percentage goes from 75% and an adjusted completion percentage, accounting for drops and things, 82.1% when he's kept clean, 63.3 when he's under pressure. And he will get some turnover-worthy plays when he's under pressure. He's going to have some opportunities you'll get some opportunities to turn him over. And this is why I think one of the biggest factors in this game is not just whether Tony White is going to have sufficient plans to get after him and find ways of getting pressure on him, which Florida State's not been great at this season. And that's, again, another reason why I think Clemson offensively is probably a pretty good matchup for Florida State. They would like to see this Florida State defense. But the thing that changes this game, I think the team that essentially scores first, the team that's able to establish any sort of early lead, probably wins this football game. I think these are the two most front-running football teams in college football this year. Clemson started the North Carolina game, for example, with a trick play that went for 75 yards and never looked back. All of a sudden, they played free. They looked like a team that was just super dominant. When they've had the chance to go up, and it hasn't been often, when they've gone up early, Klubnik looks like a different guy. He's playing free. They're able to get rolling. And once they have that confidence, it's a totally different game. And with this being on the road at Clemson, that's even more the case. On the flip side, when teams have taken that early lead and they've been able to put the pressure on Clemson's offense to respond, that's when there's been mistakes. That's when there's been, they tighten up. They've tightened up over and over again, and that's when they've had trouble. Neither of these teams is built to come back. So look at who's ahead at the end of the first quarter. There's a very good chance that's the team that wins. Now, some of you will remember last week. The Duke-Clemson game is the exception to the rule that, some of you are going to say, wait a second, didn't Duke get off to a big early lead and then Clemson came back and almost won? Well, yeah, that's true. Duke started out 21-7 and then Clemson came back and tied it up at the half. It was 28-28 at the half. And then Clemson went up in the third quarter and Duke came back with a fourth quarter comeback. True, but still Duke went out 21-7. And then they were able to hang on. That's the key. To me, this is one where if you're Mike Norvell, if you are Gus Malzahn and you've got some early stuff where you think you've got a nice wrinkle that's going to get an advantageous matchup and can get you an early lead, I think the path to beating this Clemson team is getting an early lead and forcing them to press a little bit. You have to do it. I think also, defensively, this is one of those games where, because Clemson has not been very good running the football this year, you look at their numbers, Clemson running the football has not been great. They've been, just under 4 yards per carry on the season, which is, you normally want a good bit north of that. I mean, you think about this, 3.99 yards per carry on the season. They managed 1.17 against SMU, 1.15 against LSU. Those are the two best run defenses they played. They only ran for 2.87 yards per carry against North Carolina. Now, UNC's run defense has actually gotten pretty good over the course of the last few weeks, and including that one. But Clemson has struggled to run the football all season. If you're Florida State and Florida State's only given up 3.08 yards per rush, this is one where I'm wanting to force Clemson to beat me behind the chains. Again, everything about defending Cade Klubnik is about putting him in in bad yardage situations, putting him in poor leverage situations in terms of down and distance, in terms of game, and in terms of pressure in the pocket. He just doesn't like to be off schedule, to be off leverage. Florida State's only given up more than 4 yards per carry against Virginia. That's the only game all season they've given up more than 4 yards per carry. They gave up 3.03 against Miami, Florida. And just for comparison, FSU's averaging 5.32 yards per carry in the run game on the season. Now, the last few weeks, I mean, a lot of that's loaded up early. So if we want to look at the, against Power 5 or Power 4 or whatnot, if you want to look at that, against Power 4, that's 4.15 yards per carry, which looks a whole lot less impressive. So it's close to, Clemson levels of not being able to run it as well. This is one where if you're Florida State, find ways to creatively run it, get your one-on-one matchups downfield. And the biggest thing is defensively, you've got to make sure that they cannot be two-dimensional. Stop the run, force Clemson to beat you with, off schedule, poor leverage situations. Make Cade Klubnik beat you and come after him. Come after him. And this is a game where I'd like to see you play a little bit more man-to-man at times. Go man-free. Do some of that stuff to tighten up a little bit because, again, Klubnik is a guy where if he gets comfortable, this is a guy that can get hot. He's hot and cold, and if he gets hot and he starts to feel comfortable, he's going to start dealing. And then all of a sudden, if you've got those soft zones and those guys are wide open, he's going to keep hitting them, and then you're in trouble. So that's where I see this on the defensive side. And quite frankly, I'm not all that optimistic about Florida State being able to pull off what I just said. And the main reason is because I think they're very susceptible to not getting enough pressure on the quarterback, leaving lots of space on the back end. And that is poison against a quarterback who can get hot like a guy like Cade Klubnik. And I think Clemson in Wesco, TJ Moore, and Antonio Williams, and also Adam Randall, who's their back, is a former wide receiver. Their primary running back is a former wide receiver. They're going to match him up against your backers. And that's not a great matchup. They've got some guys who can run out there in those positions. And so if you're not going to get a bunch of pressure and you're also going to leave, you're going to play a lot of zone and leave those big zone areas open against a quarterback who, if he gets comfortable without pressure, actually can throw with a lot of accuracy and start to get hot, I think this is a game where you kind of expect that to happen. So I'm not very optimistic about that. And with this being at Clemson, I think that also adds to that. With it, if it was at Florida State, where you could make Klubnik a little bit more uncomfortable with some of the additional intangibles of being on the road and the various oppressive feel of the road noise and all that, you'd feel better about it. But that's where we are. So as I'm thinking through the actual projections going into this, I think defensively, they're probably going to give up somewhere around, I don't know, looking at their numbers on the season. I would say defensively, you're going to give up maybe a little bit more, right around, say, their average on the season. They're averaging 6.15 yards per play. I think that, and that's what SMU got against them as well. I think somewhere around 6 yards per play for both teams is what I expect. Which means that you're going to get a very competitive game, and it's probably going to be some points scored. And then it's going to be down to situations. Both teams have been awful in that quarterback play. And, whether or not, which team makes a kick, which team is able to get momentum, turnovers, that sort of thing. The team that goes +1 probably wins the football game in this one. I think it's a very evenly matched game. The metrics in terms of how these teams have played all season, SP+, the KP ratings, the K Ford ratings, that is, the K Ford ratings and all that, they've got Florida State a good bit better than Clemson. They would have Florida State on a neutral favored by like 5 points. Clemson's not been that good this year, and Florida State's been better than their record this year. Both teams have, but Florida State's been a good bit better. But this is on the road. So to me, you just wipe those 5 being in Death Valley, and it's basically a coin flip type game. Both teams right around 6 yards per play is my expectation. And, which one do you think is going to win? To me, I just don't believe in what they've been able to do defensively. I think Cade Klubnik ultimately is probably going to make enough throws in this game without being under enough pressure that I think I'm going to go with Clemson to win this one. I don't feel very comfortable about it at all. I mean, I'm my sense of what's going to happen in this game, like I said, is about a coin flip. But having to choose, I'm going to go with Clemson winning this one at home, close. We'll say Clemson 42, Florida State 38. I think it's going to be an entertaining game. I think it's going to be a very frustrating game when Florida State's on defense. And I just don't think it's going to be enough. But I do think you're going to essentially have a Florida State team that might be able to run the ball well enough early to, if they can run it well enough early and get out to a lead, that changes things. But ultimately, I just don't trust that Cade Klubnik's not going to get hot and essentially put up over 40 points. So I'm going to go Clemson 42, Florida State 38. Call it a 51% chance that Clemson wins this game. I will be completely unsurprised by almost any outcome in this. If Clemson goes out there and wins by 28, not that surprising. If Florida State goes out there and wins by 28, not that surprising. There's a whole range of things that could happen in this game. I guess that's why you play it, and that's one of the reasons why college football remains so popular and so entertaining. Enjoy it. We'll see how this goes. I'll talk to you all again after the game. If you've been enjoying this podcast, please leave a 5-star rating over at Apple Podcasts and wherever else you listen to podcasts. Post and repost episodes on social media and tell a friend. And if you haven't left a review in a while, do it again. It really does help the visibility of the podcast. Before we go, I'd also like to thank my advertising partners once more. That's EPR Creations, Luis Marquez of Momentum Realty in Jacksonville, Florida, Shenandoah Real Estate in the Research Triangle of North Carolina, Garage Makeovers, the #1 garage remodeling company in South Florida, and Justin Galloway of Benchmark Mortgage, serving Florida, Tennessee, and Kentucky. You can also stop by the Unconquered Shop at unconqueredpodcast.com, where you can buy stickers, pins, magnets, t-shirts, and other swag. I am especially grateful for those of you at the Dynasty level. That is Brian Leininger, Dave Blair, Jack Horton, Jonathan Kennedy, Lee Caswell, Travis Smith, and Tyler Kashishki. You all are far more generous than I deserve. Thanks to you all. This has been Unconquered with Doc Staples. I'm your host, Jason Staples. Thanks for listening, and thanks for your support. I made this.